All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the session today with Microsoft around unlocking the cloud operating model on Azure. We've got two people leading the presentation today, Wayne Meyer, who's the cloud adoption leader at Microsoft, and Vinny Ramirez, who's a senior cloud solution architect here at HashiCorp. We do have the ability for Q&A, so I encourage everyone that's got questions to please put those into the Q&A section, and we'll address those kind of as we go on throughout the presentation, and also at a Q&A session towards the end of the presentation. And with that, Wayne, I will kick it over to you to get us started for today's session.
Hey, fantastic. Thanks, Chris, and great to be here. Apologies for the technical glitches this morning, but I think we managed to recover and get back on track. As Chris mentioned, yes, I'm Wayne. I work with Microsoft US. I'm one of the cloud adoption leads. Been at Microsoft for many years. I think my first time I joined was in 1999, and I have done a number of tours of duty across multiple continents. And it's good to be here, to be spending some time. I think we've got some really good stuff to cover today. I'm pretty passionate about this topic. I think being involved with the adoption framework for a little over 2 years as we built this out, and even more excited now that we're kind of able to start working more closely with the team from HashiCorp. A couple of years ago, I actually reached out and we were kind of doing some work together. So it's good that we've come this far in terms of the relationship. So looking forward to kind of the next 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes or so with you. As Chris mentioned, yes, please do continue to ask questions. We will be monitoring, and then we'll kind of jump through some content and go into kind of some show and tell and some demos. Vinny, do you want to take a couple of seconds to introduce yourself? So, who you are?
Yeah, no problem. Can you hear me okay, Wayne?
We got you loud and clear.
All right. Hello, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening. My name is Vinny Ramirez. I am a solutions engineer at HashiCorp. I've been with the company for about 2 years now. And prior to that, I've worked in some other startup worlds. And then, way back in the day, I was actually a operations engineer working in private data centers. So really kind of had a front row seat on the evolution of where we've been going from private data center to the onset of heavy automation to full-blown public cloud. So it's been quite the ride, and I'm at an interesting juncture of my career here at HashiCorp, just where we sit in the overall narrative. And it's a very exciting space, and it's a journey that all enterprise customers are trying to figure out right now, and really being able to unlock the potential that a platform like Azure represents to your business. So real happy to be here, and hopefully I can help Wayne out with any HashiCorp specific questions that may come up. So thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Vinny, and completely second that this is a topic that is near and dear to many customers' hearts. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today. Here's kind of how what we're going to be covering. Why are we here, and what is it that we want to kind of impart with you today. One is I want to make sure that we can share the kind of objective of the cloud adoption framework for Azure, what it actually means, what it stands for, the things that we try to unpack and uncover for customers as you go through this adoption journey. We'll talk a little bit about the connection to kind of the HashiCorp cloud operating model, show the intersects. What does this mean as we move from those static to dynamic environments? And then I really want to kind of take a little bit of time to show you how kind of some of these frameworks get put to use, and where we've got some intersects today. And no doubt these intersects will continue to evolve and get better as we go on this journey together. So with that being said, many customers over the last couple of years that I've engaged with, I've probably done this session or a similar session probably over 300 different times, just touching on where customers are at on this adoption journey. A lot of the adoption is not just about the technology. And I find, and we'll talk a little bit about what this means, but as we go through cloud adoption, and you talk about that migration from just private data centers to the world of Vert, from the world of Vert into kind of these public cloud environments, there is a different notion of how we think about the environments and the worlds that we live in. And so cloud does represent a different paradigm. It is not just about a place, but it is about a process and a methodology that we then apply within the business. And so a lot of the times we'll talk about the tech piece, and tech is relatively straightforward. I think I'm going to say it's relatively easy. The harder part of all of this is really about the people and process. And I think we've got a lot of great feedback from customers over the years that we've been working with them as to how do we, what is it that they need in order to kind of get beyond this initial kind of stage of, hey, I'm just taking assets and moving them to a place, but really, how do I kind of evolve my business and think about it in a more holistic way? And so on that, with that, we have to think about this notion of balance. And as we build out the cloud adoption framework and balance within the framework, what we try to address as we go through this is this change of operating models, this change of accounting models. There's you got to do this balance from, hey, capex to opex. We have to think about the skills balance that we have today, and the skills that I have in my private data center are probably slightly different to the skills that I need as I move into this world of cloud. We also want to think a little bit differently around how we structure the teams and the capabilities that we have. And so all of these things come with balance. And then we have to look at the assets and the technology debt that we have on premise today. And we have to do some evaluation around these environments and what do they look like. I think that we really need to kind of balance that in terms of, hey, what is going to move and what is the business justification and so on. So a huge amount of balance that we have to really kind of weigh up as we go through these specific projects. And I think cloud represents a great paradigm and a great opportunity for customers to evolve and for customers to continue to do things in a more efficient and more effective way. But we want to make sure that we coach through that. We've actually pulled together the cloud adoption framework really with the intent of helping meet customers, across this journey. Now, there's a few things that I want to call out before we get into this. The blue arrows that you see kind of moving from left to right, I want to try to omit those because cloud adoption is not necessarily just linear. Customers will jump in at different points in time. And in fact, if you are looking at this today and saying, hey, I'm a customer on my cloud journey, I'm probably scattered all over the map. All right, I've done things where I'm building some projects and I've done some, migrations, and I've probably got some holes in my governance today, but I've got a few areas of governance, and we completely understand that. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, hey, if you look at all of these parts of cloud adoption today, what are the areas that you're not asking questions about, that we can help seed those questions for you? We can answer those questions before you even ask them. And so we've tried to put this all into a single kind of, dare I say, cookbook of things that you need to go through as you adopt the cloud. I had one of our specialists in Microsoft has got a really good saying. She says, you can forget some of the steps, but the steps will remember. And I feel like that's pretty apt as you go through adoption. You really start to, you'll probably find that you're going to go back and forth and ebb and flow between these different stages and phases. But I'm going to go ahead and unpack this a bit because it's really important. Back to that earlier comment that I made about cloud being a model, not necessarily just a place. A lot of that comes down to thinking about the strategy that we build within our environments. What are the motivations that we have, and what are the outcomes that we're really thinking about? As we think about motivations today, short-term, mid-term, long-term motivations, you can kind of look at those as you've got those immediate, like horizon ones that I have to deal with, but what is the horizon 3 that I want to get to? And there might be multiple phases that you go through. An example of a horizon 1 motivation may be something like, hey, I've got to get out of my data center, or I have an aging piece of tech that I need to go out and actually modernize and take into the cloud. A longer term kind of innovation motivation might be, I really want to modernize the experience that I'm providing to my customers and consumers and the people using my products, so that I can actually upend a market or change the face of that experience and do something more unique. And so we want to make sure that that's all in balance, as well as you look at kind of some identifying these motivations and the business outcomes with it. So really, really important that we kind of address these, we prioritize these projects, and we don't think about this in the context of saying, hey, let's take everything that you have. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help organizations build that muscle of what adoption actually looks like. And so that building that muscle means, hey, I'm going to take a small set of projects I'm going to kind of evolve them. I'm going to possibly think about how do I automate a bunch of these functions. Once I prioritize those, I've now kind of get them into the stream and the steady flow that actually follows a process that is automated and consistent. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like as we go through this. From a planning perspective, we try to help organizations truly understand what that organizational alignment looks like. For the broad range of customers that I've spoken with, I tend to find that 8 out of 10 customers really lock in on this organizational alignment, and where they're struggling to understand what are the skills and what are the groups of people that I need to go forward. In the days gone by, I had my traditional kind of silos of individuals, whether it be security or networking or compute or identity. What does this look like now as I move to cloud? We've got this shared responsibility in cloud. We probably don't need to manage compute assets as much as we used to. We also, as we're building out this DevOps practice and mindset within our organization, hey, we're going to start bringing kind of your developers and your operations folk closer together, and in some instances even kind of doing joint work. One example that I had was I've got a neighbor I was speaking to, and he's an engineer on one of the dev teams at Microsoft, and turned around and said, hey, I said, how's work going? And he was like, my life is all about I'm engineering and I'm testing at the same time. And he says, that's the world that I live in now. He says 5-6 years ago, this wasn't the case. And so there is this evolution that we've got to go through, and we've got to get organizations to think about how they align their people. We're seeing organizations really kind of building up capabilities and automation skills, and we're seeing organizations building up capabilities and governance skills. And these are governance teams, and you go and find people from architecture, networking, vert teams, compute teams, traditional kind of storage teams. How do we bring all of those? And then obviously your line of business and application owners, how do we bring those together to say, hey, here's somebody from your governance team. As you think about a strategy team or that automation team, you've now got DevOps engineers in the automation team, or you've got traditional, people that have coded in the past, building out some of these pipelines and these automation capabilities. So we have to think slightly differently around that organizational alignment and what those groups and capabilities look like. And then with that, there's a skills aspect that comes to it. And at Microsoft, we're spending a ton of time going into helping customers skill up on the aspects of cloud, whether it be specific widgets and specific services that we have, or whether it be kind of more formally looking at, hey, how do we transition a business user from thinking about, IT services in one way to a new way of thinking. And so things like our enterprise skills initiatives or the Microsoft Learn platform that we've built out, these are huge. These are entities that we come in and really kind of talk about how do we kind of skill you up. Then that last piece is one that I'm really, really passionate about, is kind of really helping organizations be intentional about their cloud adoption plan, being stateful around, hey, what are the motivations, where we're driving, what are we driving towards, what are the projects that we're putting in place, who the teams are going to be doing this work. And then ultimately, as we start kind of building out this environment and getting into the technical aspects, we continually update that adoption plan so that it is evergreen or ever fresh, however you want to refer to it. But it's critical that we have an intentional adoption plan that we're building out with orgs. And I'm going to show you how we can actually take that particular adoption plan that we build and actually bring that adoption plan to life. So that's kind of all people and process. A lot of times I start off sessions with customers and I'll say, hey, this is the hard part, like really trying to get through the people and process, because most of us as technology people want to get in and start playing with the tech. But I think you want to be cognizant of what is involved within that cloud development and building out those teams. As we now move into kind of the next sets of phases, think about getting ready. Where do you want, now that you've identified all these workloads, you've identified the people that are actually going to do this work and are going to take those workloads to the cloud, where are they going to land? What are the rules that they're going to be governed by? And so we start thinking about this landing zone. What does the blueprint look like for that particular landing zone? And this is where we have this really tight relationship with Terraform, and we'll show you a little bit later on as to how we start bringing those blueprints to bear in the Azure environment. And we've got really rich guidance, and in partnership with the HashiCorp team, how we've actually brought some of that guidance into the Cloud Adoption Framework material as well. And I'll show you within some of our DevOps projects. And so I think it's really an important phase that we go through, where we can help customers correctly set up their network, their IP schemas, their naming conventions, their tagging rules? How do we think about this from a subscription management and management group hierarchy, so on and so forth? And we really want to be able to kind of build that out. And then build it out and scale it in a way that when a customer says, hey, I've now got my hub and spoke in place, shared services are running in one place, I've now got a new business or a new entity that I want to bring online, or a new set of applications that need to run in their own landing zone, we can scale it up pretty quickly. And so this is not weeks and weeks of building our landing zones and going through those decisions again, but we should be able to kind of deploy these within minutes and hours. And then ultimately, as we do that, we've got to have a really rigid set, or at least a firm set of guardrails. What is the governance rules that we put in place? And we've got a pretty thorough governance methodology that we've built out. And that governance methodology spans from helping organizations define their risks, converting those risks into policies and compliance rules, and then being able to remediate and monitor and process what is going on if anybody's in violation. We typically implement these through 5 key disciplines, and these disciplines range from kind of cost management, security, identity. How do we think about our resources and driving consistency in resource identification and onboarding? And then the deployment acceleration piece is really that pivot point to building out deep levels of governance for your DevOps practice. And that's all about kind of your infrastructure as code. And so once again, working closely with HashiCorp around the governance side to help us implement kind of some of the governance policies and the rules as we're building out these landing zones and these operating environments. Second to last, kind of thinking about this from a management perspective, we've now got these assets in a place in our environments. We've got the guardrails in place. How do we think about managing, and what are the best practices that we have today around management? Being able to do things like operational fitness reviews, making sure we look at things like architecture reviews, and do we have the right resiliency, scalability, operational excellence being applied to these assets and these workloads that are running in the Azure environments and in various workspaces. And so as we kind of think about the management aspect, critical to be able to then take each individual applications and say, hey, I can actually go in now and do an assessment of a specific application. And we've got tooling and assessments to be able to do this. And I'll show you a little bit later on where that happens, where you can actually go and evaluate an application across those measures that I gave: operational excellence, scalability, reliability, even and cost optimization. And so you want to have a core set of rules and a way to be able to manage and operate the environment. And we've got a deep set of guidance on how to do that, building out things like, what is your data collection strategy? How do we look at processing and monitoring assets and environments? When I think about data, in data environments like your SQL environments, how am I doing things like logging of of transactions and so on? And then being able to also monitor security violations and so on and so forth. So ton of guidance in the managed phase. And then lastly, what we've done is we've actually built our guidance around building specific patterns of adoption projects. And we know that there's going to be some customers that are going to look and say, hey, I want to go and migrate specific assets that I have today. These assets, whether it be my first, that very first workload that I do, or whether it be my 100th VM that I'm kind of lifting and shifting from my data center into my environment, or if I'm going to go out and do some sort of innovation project. And that innovation project might be something related to machine learning. It might be a big data analytics project. Or it could be some sort of IoT type solution that you're building. So we've provided guidance on each of these and some best practices. And then that links into our architecture center, where we have areas of, what are the best patterns and practices and reference architectures that are in place today. So the cloud adoption framework, pretty deep in terms of guidance. Roughly 1,300 pages. I've had a handful of customers that have said to me, like, we're about 60-70% of the way through on the 1,300 pages. But I think it's a really great reference guide to say, hey, as I understand all the areas of adoption that are important, I know where to go to kind of find the right set of assets and the right guidance. Now, what I want to do is I want to hand over to Vinny very quickly to talk a little bit about how we do the connection between what we've got in terms of helping customers identify adoption plans and adoption strategies, and kind of building it up to how do I now think about this from an operational perspective, and as using HashiCorp and the tooling that HashiCorp has got today in terms of bringing a lot of that to life. So Vinny, hand over to you for a sec.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. So it's interesting when you really get Microsoft and HashiCorp in the same room and listen to the way we view just this transformation and the journey that most customers are on today. And we take a similar approach. It's not just a technology discussion. It actually is more of a people, process, and tooling discussion. And how that view of the world gets rationalized really does determine the enterprises that are successful at executing and unleashing the power of a public cloud platform. And really doing that in a fast, agile, and secure way that really makes everybody comfortable in an enterprise. And where HashiCorp comes into the story, though, is we take things a little bit further in the sense that our view of the world spans not only the Azure platform, but other public clouds, which is no secret if anybody's sat through any HashiCorp messaging. And we also have this view of the world that we're coming from in terms of the private data center and how companies have operated for many years. And when we're looking back at, say, 30 plus years of a technical journey in the private data center to now what's going on in public clouds, there tends to be a lot of friction in that space between these two operating modes. And what I mean by that is the private data center has historically been very ticket driven, and that's really coming from the world of like ITIL or ITSM practices, and asking permission or filing requests to different teams that have control of certain pieces of the stack, and then sort of waiting for that to be fulfilled before you have all the infrastructure in place that you need to start to deploy a workload or innovate. On the public cloud side, it's a totally different world because it's really this DevOps, move fast and do things in a self-service world. Just give a DevOps engineer an API and away they go. So what we're seeing in the real world with this is a lot of customers are kind of colliding. These two worlds are colliding in this space of move quickly, have full control versus the request ITIL driven world. So that's really the space that HashiCorp sits in. And we have a handful of solutions that aren't just technology tools. There's a lot of emphasis on the workflow and the problem statements that these solutions exist to solve. So I don't want to completely go into all of that on this presentation, but the alignment here with the Azure CAF program, it's in direct correlation to a HashiCorp program that we call our cloud operating model. So all of the elements of the CAF that Wayne just went over, these steps along the journey that need to be rationalized and solved per organization, these problems have to be solved per public cloud as well. So versus reinventing this every time there's a location for a workload, HashiCorp likes to just sit in the kind of an abstraction layer. It really lives around 4 key components of how we've always operated. So really quickly, what those are, without drilling into the products, is there's clearly a need to solve provisioning, and our philosophy and tooling around that is completely driven by an infrastructure as code methodology. Security is very much different in a public cloud and different than how we operate in a private data center. So we do have a solution there that focuses on API-driven security, and really a response to the fact that identity-based security is really how clouds operate, and identity is can be very different and sort of a moving target when you get to a public cloud, and also dealing with some of the newer technologies that tend to run cloud native. And another area that's of utmost concern is we're starting to see services or microservices pop up everywhere, from the private data center to different operating regions in a public cloud. And when you start to fan out your services that way, there really becomes this need for one, zero trust networking. We're now operating outside of the comfort of our 4 walls and our firewalls that we've traditionally been able to harden a perimeter. you lose some of that control or give some of that up by moving into, public cloud space. So what you need to start to factor into that is a zero trust networking model. And specifically, we have some solutions that focus on zero trust service to service networking. And kind of at the top of our stack is closest to the developers themselves is really a runtime solution, where once an application has been developed, where's it destined? That really shouldn't be a concern for developers of what is this application going to run on? A VM? Is it going to run on a scheduler? That really is it going to run just native to a container? Those concerns shouldn't be top of mind as a developer. You should just be creating the best solution, kind of irregardless of where it's run. And so we have a lot of focus on that space with an API driven orchestration solution. So kind of illustrated here is our stack. These are the solutions at HashiCorp that have not only an open source offering, but an enterprise offering as well too, that introduces a lot of capabilities for our enterprise customers to solve for compliance and security controls and really that comfort level of understanding the operational mode, regardless of where you're operating. And we're tightly in line with our cloud operating model if you contrast it up against the CAF framework as well. And if you can go to the next slide for me, Wayne.
Yeah, just one point, Vinny. I think it's a great call out on the multi-cloud and the hybrid cloud or multi-cloud story, and I think it's one that we face I face every single day. And so when I kind of am talking about the CAF and getting customers, on board and thinking a little bit about the model that they're going to apply, one of my questions is, hey, I'm assuming you are multi-cloud, and the general answer is yes. Great. How do we now think about this? And so there's a great story that we get to tell together on that one.
Absolutely. I would completely echo your statement there, Wayne. Through my interactions with Azure teams, it's very much a reality, and it's one that's embraced wholeheartedly at Microsoft, which I love to see, right? It's just, we can't turn a blind eye to the fact that a company may be, initially all into one cloud provider, but then overnight through a merger and acquisition find themselves in this multi-cloud world, right? So it's inevitable. And to your point, the CAF actually is taking a stance on these are all the things, regardless of where you're operating, you're going to have to rationalize these things. You're going to have to figure out this journey, and it's going to challenge any organization to reinvent themselves, both from a people, process, and tooling standpoint. So it's really a delight to work with the Azure teams because of that just high level vision, right? Let's just be honest with ourselves on what this journey really means for everybody. Real quick on this one, I don't want to slideware us, and I'd love to try to save some time towards the end for Q&A. This is just kind of another view of the world, as we like to talk about it at HashiCorp. Is again the key problem statements that we're focused on is provisioning, securing, connecting, and running workloads wherever they live, either in a static environment where we're coming from, in most cases, from the private data center to that reinvention that's taking place to operate in, say, the Azure platform. And our solutions then, if you can go to the next slide here, they really focus on the pain that's felt along each step here. And that pain is oftentimes that sort of reset button, right? If you become very proficient at a particular cloud vendor's provisioning tool or some of your on-premise provisioning methods, that becomes a challenge to sort of retool and understand, how do I provision this thing I'm trying to do now that I'm targeting Azure as my end game for this workload? And there's in that space just a whole complex network of different ways to accomplish the same thing. And everybody knows in the tech world is too many decisions actually is a bad thing often, right? So what you can do with each of these, and I'm not going to climb the stack here, is you can standardize on certain areas of traditional operation, whether that's provisioning, security, service networking, or the actual runtime for your applications. And by standardizing, you now have this quick win to get a workload wherever you want it, whether that's just optimizing the on-premise consumption and deployment of something to, maybe finding some low-hanging fruit projects or workloads that you want to get into the Azure platform, but solving some of these key elements can accelerate that journey. And this is really where the Azure teams like to work with HashiCorp, because we can partner together to find those workloads to say, you realize if we take, this particular application, maybe you don't need to refactor it. Maybe we can optimize this and show you a way to quickly provision this and start to get some of that cool elasticity that a public cloud offers without all that heavy lift. So that's really a lot of the solutioning we like to do together with our cloud partnerships with the likes of Amazon, with the likes of Amazon as well as Azure here. And with Azure, there's even kind of a step further in the console area here. That's actually a recent announcement where we've taken one of our solutions and jointly announced an offering together with Azure to host some of the components of our console solution, which is that service-to-service networking solution. And it's actually a turnkey deliverable service now that can run in your own subscription, but managed by HashiCorp SREs. So it's a way to get even quicker delivery from one of our solutions through this partnership with Azure. And it's just a little bit of the direction we're heading in to try to make this experience as fast as possible, but as secure and compliant and painless as possible as you start to figure out and rationalize which workloads belong in the Azure platform, and how are you going to convince your organization along the way that moving it there is the right move, and then get that value out of moving it there. Not just moving it to move it, but why are we doing it, and what are we going to get by moving it there? So it's sort of what we're doing together here. I have to apologize for the AWS drop there. I talked too many clouds.
Hey, that's broad shoulders. We're good. We're good with that. Thanks, Vinny. That was a great overview and a good connection around how do we bring both the cloud adoption framework and the COM together. I'm not going to unpack it too much more than that, but I wanted to kind of show you, as we've gone through the strategy plan, ready, govern, manage, and adopt phases of the adoption framework. As you kind of think about what you were talking about with regards to asset, security, manage, migrate, and optimize, we can see how they align to these specific areas. So the people and process pieces, I know that's always work. That's kind of documented stuff that we do directly with customers. But moving forward, as you start to look at the kind of technology solutions and how they plug into the different areas of the CAF, there is a very, very tight alignment. So I had to smile. There was a question in the IM window, which was, hey, who's speaking? That's not Wayne. So yeah, I definitely don't have the same accent as Vinny. So Vinny is one of the specialists on the. He's a solution architect on the HashiCorp side. So cool. So it's just with that, I want to jump in. So we've got about 10 minutes or so left, but I really wanted to kind of spend a bit of time kind of showing you what this all looks like and how it all comes together. I'm going to take you through a few key areas that I think are relevant and pop every single time when I have an adoption conversation with customers. I want to really kind of show you the depth of content that we have, kind of think a little bit about those structure and roles, because I think it is essential to at least look at applying and adopting and kind of rationalizing within your own environments. I want to show you kind of how we think about the cloud adoption plan. Cloud adoption plan is one of those key assets that I really want to make sure that I push with customers all the time, is to be intentional about that plan. A lot of organizations say, yeah, we have a strategy, we have a plan. Hey, can you show that? Well, it's distributed across different places, or it's in one kind of PowerPoint. And I think just taking the time to be able to be intentional about writing that out and then keeping it up to date, I think is critical to this process, especially as you're starting to move a lot of technical, and it could be legacy technology, or at least as you start thinking more kind of around the future of what that looks like. I think we want to be intentional there. And then the other point to that is that people move around, and so keeping some sort of organizational understanding around where we're going. The Devops Generator, I'm going to spend a few seconds showing this, because I think it's one of the cool things that we've been able to do to actually really take things from a plan, take the idea of adoption, and then how do we actually bring that together and actually get that built out rapidly, so that you've now got all the steps built into kind of what would, in our examples, would be your Azure DevOps environment. And then I want to take you through some of the the landing zone content, show you where that's residing today, and then I'll talk a little bit about governance and, particularly around what we do within blueprints and samples, because I think it is such an essential part of a customer's adoption journey. And then, show you or talk about one of the cases of where I see kind of blueprints and Terraform Terraform coming together in an implementation. So let's just I'm going to jump over. Feel free that whilst we're doing this to kind of at least go in and fire off some questions. If there's things that are top of mind, happy to take that. But at the first start, I'm going to put at the back of this deck, there are some links and some important links for this. aka.ms/adopt. That's kind of the short link that we have today. I'll bring you into kind of the adoption framework site. I think the first place where I always go is to kind of explore the framework. I think I like to get into the content and to leverage that. There's a lot of great depth behind the getting started pages. So a couple of things that I mentioned earlier. There's this well-architected review assessment that we have. That sits kind of within that manage phase. As you look at application, you want to see, hey, how well is this application architected against a specific set of controls? You've got those 5 key disciplines where it looks at things like cost management, resiliency, reliability, operational excellence, and we can start to give ratings and rankings and then recommendations as to how to improve that app. The governance benchmark is the other one that I use almost on a daily basis, and that gives a customer a gap analysis of where do you sit on your current governance environments in terms of what are the business priorities versus the current capabilities and implementation. So whilst the CAF is just related to, it's a framework, it's got a lot of great content behind it, there are some actual tangible tools that you can start to leverage and use to actually help you navigate your way through this. So one of the things, I did this very brief kind of architecture review on a random application, but if you run through that, you're able to get things like overall results of that environment, and then you can look at, hey, how do I think about this from a resiliency, cost, scalability? If I drop down into this, I've now got each one of my areas to say, oh, scalability on this particular application kind of rank pretty low. What are the things that I should be thinking about in terms of improving this application? So taking you into specific areas around kind of database and data consistency and auto scaling and so on and so forth, where you can now drop in and actually go and get some, kind of work on that particular app. So I'm a big fan of this. I've kind of run multiple customers through it, and I think it's really, really powerful in terms of being very specific and pointy around an application and being able to go and improve on the way that application has been has been kind of deployed into the Azure environment. The next thing I want to jump into is, there's a bunch of tools and templates that we have here collected in one single location. Everything from building out that strategy and plan template, think about your cloud adoption plan. I use this on a regular basis with customers to actually build that out. And then things like actually what are the checklists that you got to go through, what are the various blueprints, and so on and so forth. Obviously, the Terraform landing zone blueprint as a set of tools is kind of surfaced up here, and then a bunch of other tools around govern and manage as well. I think for the sake of this, I'm going to just quickly jump into the frame, because I think that as you look back at the kind of the schematic that we have, you'll see that obviously the guidance is completely aligned. It's pretty easy to navigate. Everything kind of how to define those motivations and your business outcomes through to aligning that organization. The organizational alignment is really, really critical. And I see kind of like things around different cloud functions and how do we think about those functions and where do you find those roles, even down to building out a RACI model for what you believe that your teams should be looking like in the future. So if you're building a full-blown cloud center of excellence and you look at the capabilities and the teams that you have versus what we think the individuals need to do, usually I get customers kind of eyes lighting up and saying, great, this is really cool. Kind of how do I get hold of that? Well, I guess you can also go and download the Excel if you wanted to kind of play around and kind of manage that yourself. So I feel like those are some pretty immediate, tangible results that actually come out of it. As I start thinking a little bit about things like skills readiness plans, building a readiness plan for yourselves, I mean, using some of the assets that we have, looking at some of the new skill roles and so on, and how to identify gaps. We've taken some time to build that out. And then as we get into building out the kind of the landing zone environment, there's a bunch of detail in the background which I think is important for customers to know. What does it mean to organize your resources? Things change as you go from one cloud to the other, right? And so as I look at, hey, I've been an AWS person, and I'm moving over and I'm going to now start setting up on the Azure side. What does it mean kind of for subscriptions and resource groups and management groups? And so I think just helping you organize what this looks like and how do you think about access in the context of in the context of Azure. So some really good kickstarts in the background. What is a landing zone, and then how do we then start looking at things like those, the landing zones that we have today? So today you can jump in, and here's the using Terraform to build out that landing zone, kind of some standard modules and architecture design as well. What are the various capabilities that are going to be required? And then we've got a ton of this. The team have actually spent a ton of time building out these various decision guides, and these are super useful in terms of really kind of getting to the nitty-gritty around things like networking and identity and policies and so on and so forth. And how do you decipher between having single subscriptions versus multiple subscriptions? How are we going to scale those? And as I'm now thinking about all these subscriptions, how do I now organize those subscriptions with management groups? There's some big decision factors that have to come in here. So I find that, so this is really, really, really powerful. And then I think just the piece around tagging and naming conventions and giving some rules and some guidance around how should you think about tagging standards in the cloud world. And so there's tagging can be used for cost centers and financial management, but also for operational management and environments and so on and so forth. So as we kind of go through, now we've got some code in place here to kind of help you customize and deploy your first landing zone. And so this is the world that Vinny lives in, and so you kind of got a bunch of code here, and then naturally what we can do is actually jump in and go and see that set of content that's sitting in the GitHub repo. And so I've actually got that open up on the other side over here, so I'll just kind of leave it there as well. So you've kind of got a lot of good assets that have been built up, and these assets are truly kind of help customers move through pretty rapidly. And then as you start to expand that landing zone, starting to think a little bit about how do you build an enterprise scale environment? Bunch of guidance given there. excuse the noise in the background. It's my dog running up and down. So I did mention the one last thing that I wanted to kind of show here was the plan. So as you start building out that cloud adoption plan, we've done some work to try to simplify taking all of these decisions and all of the criteria that you go through when you're building out your cloud plan. And we've now said, hey, we've given you some templates. There's a template here to be able to go out and use, and you can actually for the documentation of that. But more importantly, there's this thing called this Azure Devops Generator. And so I'll give you a quick view of what this looks like. I'm going to just sign in with my own credentials. I've got my own DevOps kind of organization, and I could turn around and say, hey, I'm going to come in and let me just give this a quick, give it a name, and I won't deploy it, but I can choose the template that I have. So here's this cloud adoption plan. It's aligned fully to the cloud adoption framework. If I select that and go ahead and select the template, I create this project. It's going to go and build this adoption plan project for me. That adoption plan project will look something like this, right? So we get all your epics in place, kind of your features, your user stories, helping you go through the decision criteria from defining your strategy, building your plan, getting ready, so creating that landing zone. What does the landing zone look like? Hey, I'm going to go and deploy the landing zone with these particular templates. We can obviously build that into our pipelines as well. How do I think about governance? What are all the rules and guardrails that I want to put in place in terms of governance? So you've built out an entire project which can help you guide you through the decision criteria around getting your landing zone built and some of the areas around guardrails as well. So this is a hugely powerful tool and something that is kind of like is my general go-to. Not only is it got things for kind of a cloud adoption plan, but also, hey, if you want to kickstart some projects, well, here's a Terraform project you can kick off. Or if you're looking for some kind of quick apps that you want to go out and build, well, hey, they're built in here as well. So big fan of that. But I think, more importantly, as you start to look at the adoption plan, it's super powerful and a way to be able to get you going. We've then started to build others around how do we think about compliance and those compliance samples. And this brings me to Azure blueprints. So the team are hard at work building various Azure blueprints and compliance samples that you can use today. Everything is kind of, and I'm going to take you through a quick example, but everything has got let's take 2701 shared services, for example. It's got your various control mapping aligned, where you think a bit about, hey, what does it mean for segregation of duties, classification of info, management of privilege rights, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, if I wanted to be ISO 2701 shared services kind of compliant, here's all the things that need to be put in place. Now, what does this mean in terms of tooling? So in Azure today, we've actually taken all of those samples that have been documented, and they've actually been built directly into the platform. And so I can go in and say, hey, here's a particular blueprint today that if I go and align that to, let me say, this particular subscription, I could hold it at the management group level as well. But at this particular subscription, I go and, sorry, let me just give it a name quick. And I've got my name up on this particular blueprint. I've got all the artifacts that are in place. I can go and configure some of these parameters. But why is this important is that I can now, if you've got a scenario where you've got these compliance rules that are defined at a central organization level and need to be adhered, and you're looking for a specific dev team that might be using Terraform today that says, hey, we're deploying directly through Terraform. We can go in and actually have these blueprints created. We can access them through code, bring them into the Terraform deployment and say, I'm just going to pull the blueprint directly from that environment that has been created by the central organization, and I'm now going to go out and apply that blueprint to the environment that I'm using. So there's some really cool things that we can do here. So that's an example of pre-created ones. Naturally, we could go in and take any one of those blueprints. We could adjust those blueprints, kind of add in our own policies or role-based access control rules, or even ARM templates into them, so that we have a standard blueprint for the organization, and those can be pulled in and deployed as through Terraform as we see fit. The benefit of kind of blueprints is that you're able to then go and do things like version control on those on them as well. So from ultimately from an Azure perspective, I think we're tightly integrated with the team, with the HashiCorp team. We do a lot of work together. I think just to recap where we've been as CAF and COM, this is all about best practices. What we're trying to do is help organizations kind of remove these blockers, or at least answer the questions that you're not asking. How do we get to a starting point and to kind of accelerate, and then ultimately give you an outcome and some sort of and a path to innovation to say, hey, we can do things rapidly. It doesn't have to be all in right now, but ultimately we want to be able to step you through this. And I think this partnership between HashiCorp and Microsoft enables you to do that successfully. So ultimately, some of the resources that we have available for you today, the kind of the short links to the Microsoft content that I showed you, the links to kind of the Terraform environments and the kind of the code and the samples, and then working with Chris and Vinny, we've actually got a bunch of great content sitting on the IO site as well for things. How do we do things like cost estimation and your various upgrade guides and so on and so forth. So with that, I want to kind of thank you for your time. I want to thank Vinny and Chris for the invite to getting in having us here to co-present. We have got some time, and we can take some questions. If you want to drop them into the IM window. If not, feel free to connect up with me on LinkedIn. Happy to have further conversations. With that, thank you, Vinny. I appreciate your time as well.
Yeah, my pleasure, Wayne. Thank you. And yeah, I'm available to hang out for a few minutes and see if anybody pops any questions in here.
So, okay, one of the questions that has popped in is is the CAF for new customers to cloud? I mean, we've been in the cloud for some time. So we find a lot of customers using the adoption framework at various phases. We've got customers that are brand new, but we've also got customers that have been in for 6-7 years. They've built their environments. Over time, cloud changes, and and some of the guidance has changed as well. And so with that, it's a good opportunity for us to go back and reaffirm and say, hey, how well are you doing on the way that you built out your plan, or how well your team structured, or hey, let's have a look at the guidance that you're working on in terms of your landing zone. Things have changed and evolved as well. And so the one notable one would be things like management groups. Back in the day, we didn't have management groups, and so we had these very flat structures, and customers were concerned about managing multiple subscriptions. We also, as Microsoft, gave guidance to say, hey, singles, get down as few subscriptions as possible. But we now have the ability to say, hey, scale that out and build it to your business and build for what you need. So I think we're seeing customers at different phases of adoption, and that's been super useful. So, question with the blueprint: are there any with cost projections? So we don't have cost projections per se, but what you can do is you can use ARM templates to go in and actually define things like budgets and so on. And I've actually personally done that in some of mine, where I've got an ARM template that I've put into the blueprint to define the budget for that particular subscription. What you can then do is then start to use things like Azure Cost Management, and because you've got your tagging rules and your policies applied to your subscriptions and various management groups, you can now start to report on those specific either workloads or applications that are tagged in a similar way, or you can look at a tag for an entire holistic view, and you can say, here's what I'm potentially forecasting. So Azure Cost Management would be the product that I would absolutely use there. Other question. So what is my full name? Full name is Wayne Meyer, Meyer. And should enforcement rules be authored in HashiCorp Sentinel or Azure Blueprints? Vinny, I'm gonna let you weigh in on that one. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a question we often get, and there's sort of two lenses or approaches with that. Sentinel, in terms of, I'm assuming we're talking about Sentinel with Terraform here. And in the use of the Sentinel capability in Terraform Enterprise, that's really more of a proactive control. So preventing somebody from configuring or deploying some resource into Azure in a non-best practice manner. That's more of the proactive approach, and absolutely Sentinel has a lot of capabilities in that space. And some of the value there is not having to be as restrictive against the subscription with a bunch of hardened policies that may lead to this cycle of back and forth requests. Can somebody ease up these restrictions, because I'm a developer and you've got this subscription so locked down, I can't do anything. So a way to get ahead of that would be a more broadly opened up subscription that Sentinel governs based on your persona of a user of the prescription, as an example. But yet there's a whole other side of like the reactive approach to policies that you'd want to leverage some of the Azure policies for, just, so it's really a better together story than a one versus the other, if that makes sense.
Cool, thanks. And thanks for the comment. That was calm, clear. We try very hard to be calm and not too chaotic. So appreciate that. I think we got two other questions. What are the resources available to me to learn more about Azure? So did mention one of those already. I think the Microsoft Learn platform. So if you go to docs.microsoft.com, if you go into the learning platform, that's a phenomenal resource. I use it myself. In fact, it's one of the key resources that are being kind of driven throughout for Microsoft internal people to kind of learn about certain new services and kind of also to drive towards certification. So I would absolutely use that. And then how should you approach an Azure policy and deploy if it not exists, and Terraform as it would potentially deviate from your state? Once again, so from a policy perspective, we can land. I can talk to those, but I'm gonna let Vinny kind of talk a little bit about on the Terraform piece.
So to that, I think where how I interpret that question is more of a configuring a policy post deployment or configuration with Terraform, and Terraform does have this concept of a state file, which is a record of anything the tool has done. So to that point, as far as where I think this conversation is going is taking the lessons learned or best practices from Azure blueprints and applying them via Terraform would really give you the best of both worlds, as well as the ability to then layer some Sentinel policies, in between that motion, and that so it is correct that if any changes are made on an Azure subscription or resource by a tool other than Terraform, it won't get tracked in the state file. So the more you push through Terraform, the more you can leverage all of the capabilities of Terraform, including enterprise features like Sentinel. So the kind of the beauty of this is you have all these best practices, and it may, as you're building out your competency with Terraform, you may be taking a crawl, walk, run where there's maybe some journey there that has to take place, and it's not just this big bang approach of like everything pumping through Terraform and stalling out the value that you can be gaining from taking different phased approaches. So there's not really like a silver bullet answer to that, but to answer the question, if things are modified outside of Terraform, that won't get captured in the state. So you really got to kind of balance all of that in your workflow, and as you start to approach the operational mode here with the
tool. I would also say as you're building out that Azure environment and that hierarchy with your subscriptions and your management groups and so on, that as you think about the RBAC and the rules that are being applied, you're very thoughtful about who can, you want to be thinking about things like just-in-time access and just-in-time controls, and that least privilege level, so that folk can just do their job. I think there's other capabilities built into Azure as well, where you can do things like resource locks and so on, so you can't go make changes to specific things. So I would absolutely say it is you got to be thoughtful about how we build that out, so that it isn't the Wild West. And I think as you start to drive those deployments through specific tooling, you've got the right roles and applied to those individuals. With that, I'm gonna, I think we've come to the end of this session. We're getting the time hook as well. So thank you very much for the questions. Once again, if there are any further conversations that need to be had, happy to catch up on, catch me on LinkedIn. I did put that at the start, and there are our names as well. And so feel free to reach out, and we will gladly follow up with any other questions that you may have. Appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.